Lord Agnew, Theodore Agnew, you may remember, he was the anti-fraud minister at the Treasury, quit the government over the government's pretty poor record on cracking down on fraud. Well, I'm delighted that Lord Agnew joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
I suppose first of all, your reaction to this story: shocked, surprised, completely in keeping with what you suspected was going on?
Yeah, the third, completely in keeping with all of the concerns that I had. I mean, for example, I wrote letters of congratulation to Border Force officials for holding up those suitcases of cash. I mean, members of your team applied for a FOI to get a copy of the letter, which they said was lost, but I can assure you that I did write the letter.
So interesting how these things do sometimes get lost. Explain to me what you think is the problem. I mean, it just sounds extraordinary, this. So when you were a government minister, you were aware this is going on, and the government seems to just sort of shrugged all this off. They don't seem remotely bothered by the loss of, well, whether you call it £4.9 billion lost to fraud, £17 billion that might never be clawed back from what was supposed to be loans. At a time when we're facing a cost of living crisis, people want the government to do more. They just seem remarkably unbothered about losing billions of pounds.
Well, you're right. There seems to be an astonishing complacency, that was what troubled me. But I just want to try and focus on what can still be done, because although the trail will go cold the longer this is left, there is still the opportunity to pursue these people. But what that needs is a clear out of the board of the British Business Bank, because they are the agency who were charged with running this scheme. But the problem we now have is that you have the senior people there who are trying to defend the indefensible rather than tackle the problem. So all of their energy goes into defending all of the bad decisions that were made 2 years ago, rather than an acceptance of mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but you then want to get on, learn from them, and put in place the solutions which are still available.
And I suppose the defence, or at least the defence at the beginning, was we were facing an extraordinary, unprecedented crisis. And to some extent, getting money out of the door to the people who really needed it quickly actually probably meant that there were going to be some having a system which was very quick and easy to apply for probably meant that there was going to be a bit of fraud, or in the same way buying PPE. Not all the PPE that we bought was good, but at least we were buying it because we needed it. Your point is that even accepting that, with hindsight, the discovery of fraud occurring, there's just a culture of cover-up rather than trying to get that money back.
Exactly. The energy is going into justifying the indefensible rather than tackling the problem. So, for example, a huge amount of effort by the British Business Bank to resist the publication of the recipients of that £47 billion. I mean, this was taxpayers' money given out to people on very soft terms with 100% state guarantee. That should be a register that is publicly available. But there is now one crime charity is lodging, I think it's called a super complaint against the British Business Bank to reveal the recipients. But I mean, the time and effort to play those silly games is just what I would call reductive. And I mean, I've been asked to be a witness in that case, which I don't want to do because I don't want to keep attacking the government. But why on earth will the British Business Bank not just do the right thing, open the list so that people can see what on earth went on?
Which other areas should we be looking at? I mean, George Greenwood seems to have done a good job here of shining a spotlight on this issue. Are there other areas of what was going on in government during your time that you think need to be brought to public attention?
Well, I focused on the bounce-back loans because they were the most significant intervention in this area where the taxpayer was bearing the full burden of risk. So 100% of any losses that the banks sustain in this program, they can turn up to the Treasury to have a check to pay them back. And therefore, there were other loan schemes, but the banks shared some risk. So I'm less worried about that because there is an alignment of interest and they will do the right thing because it protects their position as well. But what I'm worried about here is that we are still not getting data from BEIS, the department that oversees the British Business Bank, on the extent of the losses being paid out to banks for fraud. So there was a written question in the Lords the other day from a peer asking how much had been paid back. And although the sum was not that large, from memory, I think it was about £70 million under the guarantee, but 20 million of that related, or now what they said, less than 20% of that was for fraud. Well, if that's 19% in the first payout for fraud losses, that gives you a sense of what might be to come.
Do you think that the solution to this is that basically we won't get to the bottom of this unless there's a clear out at the British Business Bank? Presumably starting with Lord Smith of Kelvin, the chair of the board. He's had lots of jobs in the past. He was chaired SSE, the energy company. He helped run the organising committee for Glasgow 2014. Do you think he was the right person to put in charge of what was actually a phenomenal piece of government work, hugely expensive, massive amounts of taxpayers' money, and just massively open to fraud?
Well, I judge people by their actions. So in this case, it's proven that he hasn't been the right person. And I would just hope he had the decency to resign. I have said this before. Apparently, he met Jacob Rees-Mogg, who took over my role in the Cabinet Office. And the first thing he said to Jacob was, "Are you going to sack me?" To which Jacob said, "No, if I was going to do that, I'd take you out to dinner and do it properly." So my offer to Jacob Rees-Mogg is, I will book the restaurant, indeed the club that he and I are members of. I will pay for the meal and pay for the wine so he can do it in a civilised way, but it needs to happen quickly.
Which club's that?
That would be indiscreet.
Do you think it might be better if Jacob Rees-Mogg focused on that rather than focused on clawing back some of these billions of pounds rather than going around leaving notes on people's desks about them working from home?
Well, I mean, that is another very significant issue. That was another part of my portfolio, the Government Property Agency. And I do think that there needs to be a proper debate about whether civil servants do work from home far more than before the COVID crisis. I think there has to be a debate about the London loading. So a civil servant who works in London and has the costs of commuting into London gets extra money for that. If they're not going to do that, then they can't have it both ways. They can't stay at home and take the London loading, but not have the commuting costs. So there is a debate to be had on that.
But presumably there's quicker savings to be made by concentrating on this fraud.
Yeah, but he has been very active on it. I think it's important that he understands it. It's a very, very big portfolio, as I knew from bitter experience.
Lord Agnew, thanks very much for joining us on Times Radio. Really appreciate your time this morning. Lord Agnew there, the former government minister, the anti-fraud minister, who resigned because he thought the government wasn't taking this seriously enough.